You are going to hear today from Casey Green, and Casey Green is pretty much the guru on all things campus computing. Casey earned his PhD in higher education from UCLA, and as I said, he is the founder of Campus Computing, which is the largest continuing study of the role of e-learning and information technology in American colleges and universities. Casey is also the author or editor of more than 20 books and published research reports and more than 100 articles and commentaries that have appeared in academic journals and professional publications. Important to me is I had the opportunity to meet Casey through the Digital Fellows Program when he served as the director of that program. And I think, as everybody knows, we've been working hard on our campus to expand Digital Fellows and really expand the whole use of e-learning and other technologies. Casey also has a Digital Tweed blog, which is published on Inside Higher Education. And in February 2009, EdTech magazine identified him as one of the top 100 EdTech influencers, noting that he is a definitive source for the higher education transformation conversation. So at this time, I want to introduce you to Casey, and I think he's got a great presentation for us today.
Great, Karen, my thanks to you, to Cody for making all this come together and work on screen across time and time zones, and to all of your colleagues, both in the room and across Alaska, who are joining us today. I know that time is the most precious commodity on campus, so I will try to use my part of it efficiently. The presentation, we're going to wander the landscape on a lot of different parts of digital learning, sort of touching different parts of the digital learning elephant. The good news is you don't have to take pictures of the screen. Karen and Cody have a PDF copy of the presentation with some supplemental readings related to some of the stuff that I will talk about. I'm going to draw in large part, but not entirely, from the work of the 2018 and past years of the annual Campus Computing Survey. It's an ongoing survey of CIOs. The intent is to provide data as opposed to just opinion or epiphany about a lot of campus IT planning and policy issues. So I'm going to run through these slides. There's about 22 of them. It's going to be fairly quick, and should be plenty of time at the end for your questions. And here we go. I want to begin, oddly, perhaps for some of you, by paying homage to Dwight D. Eisenhower. Odd person, perhaps some of you might think, to talk about a conversation about digital learning. Many of us know Eisenhower as the commander of D-Day forces in the Second World War. He was also the president of the United States from 1953 to 1961. What I didn't learn so much later in life is that he was also president of Columbia University before becoming president of the United States. And there's a story about Eisenhower that's relevant to our conversation about digital learning, in that prior to being his investiture as president of Columbia, but after the announcement of his appointment, he's walking across the campus with the provost. And you have to remember about Eisenhower. He went to West Point. He lived in the military. This was a command and control environment all his life. Somebody made orders, and the orders were carried out. He's talking with the provost. The provost says to the incoming president of Columbia, there's some issues where the university and the faculty don't necessarily align. We have different perspectives. And Eisenhower turns and says, well, why doesn't the university tell the faculty what to do? And the provost says, whoa, I'm sorry, let's bring this back. General, you have to understand, the faculty are the university. And for me, what's important about this is that any conversation about digital learning has to be a faculty-centric conversation. Yes, we're looking for resources and services that will enhance the learning experience and learning outcomes of our students. But if we don't attend to the faculty part of this conversation, nothing will ever happen. We have to be sure that we make a compelling statement to faculty about these resources. We have evidence that they work, and we have to make it safe for faculty to use and leverage these resources. Moving forward, let's also sort of frame in the context, let's talk about insanity. No doubt you've all heard this definition, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome. This is incorrectly attributed to Albert Einstein, according to the folks at the Einstein Institute. No question that we see some of this going on in a lot of different areas And perhaps the best way to think about that is in STEM courses. This is data from the Gartner Institute. Some of you may be familiar with the work of John Gartner for freshman year experience. This is his new gig for the last 18 years, actually doing course redesign. We typically think about, if you want to look about doing things over and over again, insanity, it is absolutely what we do with STEM courses. Students who don't succeed in math and chemistry and biology, we send them back to do it again if they get a DFW. And it's not just STEM courses. This is data released last fall from the Gartner Institute. It's also accounting. Why accounting matters is because it's the #1 undergraduate major in terms of freshman interest among undergraduates. It's the #1 degree area among baccalaureate recipients. So those numbers are as high for accounting as they are for calculus and chemistry. Let's go into great expectations about digital learning. And let me go back. The slide's not here, but my friend and colleague John Gartner talks about gateway courses as essentially being the Bermuda Triangle of higher education, where we send tens of thousands of students each year. They go in and they disappear because they have a DFWI experience and they never emerge. And that has dramatic consequences for their self-esteem, for their academic careers, and obviously for their institutions. Let's go forward. Let's talk about digital curricular resources. These are surveys I've done recently of chief academic officers, CIOs, and faculty. Strong belief on the part of CAOs and CIOs that curricular digital resources are richer and more personalized. Faculty, not so much. You see those numbers are quite different. Curricular resources make a learning more efficient and effective for students. Again, very high numbers for provosts and CIOs, much lower for faculty. We don't have comparable numbers on the next two items. Faculty here strongly support the role of technology to enhance instruction. Again, CIOs and CAOs very high. And the senior leadership thinks it understands. Again, we don't have a faculty side to this. So this all comes together. If we aggregate this, the message is, well, provosts and IT officers have great expectations for digital pedagogy. Faculty, perhaps not so much, but faculty are actually doing it, and they're in the midst of it, and they're wondering why doesn't this stuff work as effectively as it is, or they're having some disappointments with the experiences of the resources they're using. We talk about digital learning. I could flash on the screen, but in the interest of time, I won't. A lot of different statements about digital learning, and they're all laden with jargon. I mean, ultimately, you would need a decoder ring to kind of figure out what this stuff is. Or you could go back to the definition that Justice Potter Stewart offered in a famous Supreme Court ruling about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And that perhaps is the experience of many faculty with digital learning. I can't define it. The definitions are ambiguous or jargon language laden, but when I see it, I know it. And when I know it, I see it. That's part of the challenge that we encounter in terms of trying to say, what is digital learning? We also need in our conversation about digital learning to recognize that these are not discrete siloed events. Innovation occurs in an ecosystem. Digital learning occurs in an ecosystem, and innovation doesn't occur in a vacuum. There's all kinds of things that surround the compelling innovation. There's back-end infrastructure. There are alliances that add value. There are things that supplement and supplant the requirements of what we were using, what we hope to replace. And user support is critical for faculty and students in any kind of innovation environment. And we have to particularly pay attention to changing current practice. Are we supplementing? Are we supplanting? And how do we make that change safe for faculty and make that change safe for students? How do we provide compelling evidence that it works, that it really makes a difference? And how do we facilitate and make that safe change for faculty? Think, for example, about migrating an LMS, moving from platform A to platform B. It's just not the decision to do it, is that many faculty members have a lot of materials, time, and effort they've invested in building materials for a particular platform and may need some assistance as opposed to saying, get it done by a start date for the start of the next term. I want to turn to data from the 2018 Campus Computing Survey, the top 5 campus IT priorities. This is what CIOs told us were their priorities. We asked them to rank these things on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 not important, 7 very important. And the numbers you're going to see, the percentage are saying 6, 7. So they can rank a number of these things. This is how these numbers come out. First is learning and managerial analytics. We talk a lot these days about we want to use analytics in higher education. We want to take the experience and the use of analytics from the consumer and corporate market and bring those resources and services and insight to higher education. Over half saying this is a really important priority. And yet, if you'll see on the right side of the screen, Less than a fifth of the survey participants rate the current investments in data analytics as very effective. Our reach exceeds our grasp. We're not getting the value. We're not getting the return on investment from analytics to date. Item number 4, assisting faculty with the instructional integration of IT. That number again, almost 60%. And yet on this, only 15% of faculty, CIOs say that IT training for faculty is excellent. And only an eighth of campuses have expanded the review and promotion algorithm for faculty to say, for those who say doing instructional integration of IT is part of their scholarly portfolio, only an eighth of campuses include that in the review and promotion algorithm. I'm not suggesting you should get points for simply posting a syllabus on the website. But if in fact, if you view this as being part of your scholarly activity, and this is an institutional priority, then there ought to be some way to acknowledge that and recognize that for review and promotion, and we don't, and that's consistent across sectors and segments. Item 3, leveraging IT to support student success. No surprise here. This is the big buzzword these days about student success. It has a lot of different components, whether it's curriculum, whether it's analytics, whether it's early warning systems, a lot of moving different parts at different campuses, it's support systems and academic services and counseling. And yet on this, only 2 in 5 say that their investments to support student success have been very effective. Hiring and retaining IT talent. This is a huge issue. 3 in 4. We've seen this, and particularly in the wake of the economic downturn that began in 2008. And I understand that Alaska's got its own unique problems in terms of what's going on with funding for higher education across the state. 4/5 report it's hard to retain or hire people because of off-campus competition with salaries and demand for talent. This is going to be a huge problem. We see more and more people leaving higher ed in terms of off-campus opportunities. Number 1 issue, according to IT officers, is IT data security, and only a third rate IT data security as excellent. I want to move now to the issue about great faith and the benefits of technologies. This is, again, CIO's adaptive learning technologies, which are coming to market from a variety of different platforms and providers. Overwhelming sense that this has great potential to improve learning outcomes. Overwhelming sense on the part of IT officers, digital curricular resources provide a richer, more personalized experience. Overwhelming, once again, curricular resources make learning more efficient and effective. You saw some of this along the way. And yet, again, this national data from IT officers across sectors and segments, our efforts to go all digital, and that means day one access to digital curricular resources, impeded by the fact that many of our students don't own their own devices. It's not enough to say that they go to campus labs if they're off campus. If students are doing their work from 10 o'clock in the evening to 4 in the morning, as opposed to 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. This access to a platform, to a notebook, possibly a tablet, certainly a phone is not sufficient, as both a reading and a creation device is a big problem, particularly in many four-year institutions and especially with community college students. And the deployment numbers for these technologies, as attractive as IT officers may view them, are low. Our numbers suggest only less than 20% of fifth or general education classes are using some kind of courseware, although that number's up a little bit from 2017. And less than a tenth of developmental and general ed courses are using some kind of adaptive technology. Admittedly, we are in the early days of these technologies. They vary dramatically across platforms and providers. Some providers are having great success in math, less so in perhaps in other chemistry, in other STEM areas. It's a lot of moving parts. It is, as the British would say, early days. There's a tendency on the parts of higher ed and the evangelists and the advocates to sort of articulate, sort of be energetic about the next bright, shiny digital object. We have to go slow on this. We're looking for evidence as opposed to epiphany and opinion, or we should be in terms of thinking about deployment and campus strategies. And again, faculty, our data suggests, are far less optimistic about these issues, about these resources, than campus leadership, IT officers, and senior academic officers. But again, faculty are the ones who are doing it. Faculty are the ones who are trying it. Faculty are the ones who are doing on the ground, in the classroom, on the screen assessments of these resources. They have direct experience. One of the striking things to me is that many campuses don't assess their tech investments. When we ask IT officers, do you have a formal program to assess the impact of IT? 16%. That's about 1 in 7 have an ongoing program, whether it's a particular initiative in a department or something campus-wide. And yet, the survey says of IT officers, yes, it's very important that we assess the benefits. It's important we look at the ROI, and we should be surveying students and faculty about resources even as we don't. The survey data confirmed that for more than a decade, campuses don't really do a focused and concerted and intentional effort to assess the impact and benefits. And the question becomes, why don't they? I want to emphasize these are national data. We have data disaggregated by sector and segment that's available online at the 2018 Campus Computing Report on my website. And I also want to emphasize I am not talking about the University of Alaska or any of the campuses including Southeast. Let me be very clear about that. I'm aggregating the national data and the data by sector and segment. I'm not talking about an individual campus, okay? We're seeing a coming talent, IT talent. You saw the numbers before about IT talent was the #2 issue. 3/4 of the IT officers report hiring and retaining. This is the numbers you saw before. 4 and 5 agree we have a difficult time retaining talent because salaries and benefits are competitive. 70% report funding is not recovered from the budget cuts. This is particularly true in community colleges and public four-year institutions. And yet, it's personnel, it's not products that are the heart of the campus IT infrastructure. It's people who add value to products, not the other way around. And we really have to attend to our people. But the technology works best when we acknowledge it's tech-enabled high touch, not the technology itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue. And I mentioned the data earlier about sort of disappointment with analytics. I view this as analytic angst. Again, the tools fall short of campus provider promises and campus needs. Although analytics is the #5 priority, the investment is not rated as very effective. We're not delivering on the implied and inferred potential. Critical issues of trustworthy data, effective tools, thoughtful training. And we also have another issue about data babble across the various platforms we use. This goes back for a long time between different platforms that aggregate student data, institutional data, trying to aggregate that so we can do big data analytics. And we also have a culture issue because historically we have used data as a weapon, not as a resource. We've said, what have you done wrong as opposed to how do we use data to understand what you can do better? That needs to change. We need to change the data culture in higher ed so we figure our way out of the rabbit hole as opposed to pushing people into the hole. CIO assessments about data resources for digital users. This is something we've been tracking for a number of years. And as you see on the screen, the data are not great. Again, our scale here is poor to excellent. The bars reflect the percentage of respondents who say we're doing excellent, scale of 6 or 7. Not good on this. ADA is the law of the land. Many campuses still struggle to provide legally mandated access and resources. These are lawsuits waiting to happen. Every time I go to the archives at the Chronicle of Higher Education inside higher ed to sort of follow up about something I've heard at a particular campus about a complaint or the complaint that was escalated to litigation, the complainants and the litigants win. We need to start baking this in as opposed to bolting it on. And one of the problems with that is how we manage ADA accessibility. It's often an afterthought. And also it's issues about we've got spread out responsibility. Whether it's on campus or hybrid courses or online courses, we disperse that responsibility. We kind of try to bolt it on after the fact as opposed to bake it in from the initial design point. And most faculty and most departments don't have the experience or the expertise to address digital accessibility. Interestingly, what I'm hearing from some campuses, from some CIOs, is when they start to try to address accessibility, it's offered new opportunities to provide added value for other users. Case in point, from the consumer experience, I'm 68. I watch a lot of British procedurals, as perhaps some of you do on Netflix, late at night when I can't sleep. I don't always understand the accents. When I put on closed captioning, that's opened up a whole new world to me. Well, I wasn't the target the audience for closed captioning, but it has brought new resources and services and benefits to a broader set of users in some interesting ways. That's true about other issues about digital accessibility, both off campus as well as on. We'll talk about budget cuts. And again, I know Alaska is no stranger to issues about budget stress and budget cuts. We've been tracking this for a number of years through the Campus Computing Survey. These are the trends going back to 2008. These are not the percentages of campus budgets that were cut, rather the percentage of campuses reporting a budget cut. And you can see as you get to the later years, to 2016, 17, and 18, still large, even though in theory we're past the recession and the upheavals that began in 2008, large numbers of campuses are still reporting budget cuts, and there are compounding consequences because we're taking some off from the budget from last year that took some off. Community colleges in particular are continuing to suffer. And it's not just the annual budget cuts, but also campuses experience both budget cuts and mid-year budget givebacks or recessions. You can see these numbers. They're consistent, they're painful, and yet there's been low let-up in demand for IT resources and services, for security, for wireless access, for resources, for instruction. And it leaves IT leadership having to kind of put digital fingers in the dike short term, as opposed to being able to develop a comprehensive strategy about how to address in a comprehensive and a thoughtful way the expanding demand for IT resources and services. Again, 2/3 report IT funding hasn't recovered from the budget cuts of recent years. And this has dire impact on infrastructure, resources, and personnel, consequences for instruction, resources, and services. And many campuses, again, are struggling to find a thoughtful, strategic, smart plan to fix the IT funding challenges they confront. Video is obviously a big part of the environment that we experience in higher education. Video surpassed, as a resource for instruction, surpassed audio in terms of lecture capture a couple of years ago. The numbers are still low, but on the other hand, these numbers are probably underestimate sort of the actual head count in classes with video, because a lot of the video is often in lower division undergraduate courses. There's also a lot in medical schools and some other professional programs. Video obviously increasingly important for hybrid, flipped, and online courses. And again, when we look at the assessment on the part of IT officers, only a quarter say that their video capture services are excellent. I want to touch a bit on OER, open educational resources. We have institutional support versus faculty ambivalence, I think, is the only way to characterize this. IT officers report their campus encourages faculty to use OER content. Obviously, the attractiveness of this is lower cost for students, the potential for day one access, also supporting campus efforts to develop OER, although again, in many cases, not providing recognition and support for faculty who do so. Overwhelmingly, IT officers, and we have other data about CAOs, agree that OER materials will be an important resource for instruction in the next 5 years. These numbers are growing. And yet, IT officers acknowledge that faculty in my campus believe that the quality of OER material has some challenges. Only 40% say it's about the same. Many faculty have never had direct experience with OER, or feel that there's no way it's comparable because it doesn't have the kind of QA process that a commercial product would have. And so the continuing conversation about OER, even as the role expands, and there's a lot of interest because OER reduces costs, the student issues become cost and day one access, which I will stipulate are truly important. The faculty issues about the prerogative of choice for materials and quality. And for many, it's also that ecosystem I referred to earlier, between buying a commercial textbook that has all kinds of ancillaries that are part of that ecosystem, and comparable ancillaries may not already sort of been pre-packaged or pre-aligned for an OER product or an application. Let's talk for a moment also about impending emerging technologies, the impending impact of emerging technologies, AI in analytics and instruction, AR, Internet of Things. So you can see the trend data last year to this about AI as a resource for analytics as opposed to instruction. My take is we're going to see more AI on the administrative side than the instructional side for a while. And the reason for that is we can bake it in. It's going to get added to administrative systems. It's going to get added to various applications that are purchased, as opposed to individual faculty members who have to make individual decisions about AI in their course materials. The AR applications, again, may grow over time. I think one of the interesting things about AR and VR, lots of potential applications in sciences. But I think one of the things is I think about my own experience using some of these AR applications in chemistry and biology and others, is to differentiate between the experience of knowing the science as opposed to doing the science. You know, for those who need to know the basics of the science, AR and VR may work very well in terms of moving beakers and looking at chemical reactions and looking at molecules. But if you actually have to do it, that experience won't be sufficient. For a lot of the students who are actually going to do science as their majors, do science in their careers, AR and VR won't eliminate the need for them to actually have that direct physical experience. Internet of Sensors and things, that'll be an interesting resource that's coming that, again, may feed into administrative systems as for analytics. And again, we're still early days in terms of wearable technologies. Again, you can see just highlighting the AI side of this, where those numbers are a little higher as opposed to the others. Let me wrap up with a little bit of editorial assessment in terms of some of the work I do. I've been arguing for a while, the key campus challenges IT are no longer about technology. Many of you have been on campuses long enough to remember the vigorous and almost religious-like wars of Mac versus PCs in the 80s, and sort of what that did to friendships and professional relationships. Those things sound silly today. And technology, quite honestly, is the easy part of the campus conversation about IT. Excuse me. The hard stuff, people planning, policy programs, silos, egos, IT entitlements. You have to get this from me or I won't do this until I know that it works. It's having evidence that the stuff is compelling. The instructional challenge for me is, how do we make digital learning compelling? Show me the evidence that this makes a difference for my students and make it safe. How do I change my curriculum? How do I revise my syllabus? How do I migrate materials on an LMS or in some other way so I don't look foolish in front of my students? And part of that, we have to document the evidence of impact. We have to give recognition and reward to faculty. And we have to do a far better job of communicating about the effectiveness of and the need for IT resources within departments, within units, and across campus. The other thing we need to attend to, I would argue, is the importance of visualization. So let's take a moment about this. All of us visualize all the time. You got up this morning, you came to campus, or for me, I'm sitting in my office thinking I'm going to do this webinar with folks at the University of Alaska. How do they want? I want them to see me. How do I see myself? I think back to every 4 years, the run up to the Olympics, the folks that broadcast that, when they do the profiles on the individual athletes, they do these little profiles and training. They tell us not just about the physical training, but the mental training. You got to visualize yourself in the competition, walking up to the blocks, to the start, to the gate, whatever it might be, in the ready position, launching when the starter's gun goes, whatever it might be. I would argue the same thing occurs for those of us who teach and work on campus. My own personal experience with that, I think about my career, again, at the risk of self-disclosure, as opposed to shameless self-promotion. I'm 68. I've been doing academic work on campuses for over 4 decades. Early in my career, when I went to conferences and I had to visualize, how will I be and what will I look like at these events, the two challenges for me were content and clothing. What would I say and how would I appear? And I struggled with the content, but going back to the late 70s, early 80s, the clothing was easy because I put on the armor, right? Everybody, men at least, showed up in suits. So that's how I visualized myself. The choices were made for me. That was easy. On the other hand, there are certain kinds of ways in visualizing myself and presenting myself to groups and groups making inferences about me, that if I want to signal I'm an academic, I would be various places in academic regalia, a tweed jacket, a tie, khakis, and if you turn me around, you would see a chalk stripe on my back. So that's sort of my, sort of daytime academic regalia. And again, alternatively, another way to present myself in terms of my own visualization and that for others, there's one part of my career 20 years ago, I was the vice president for education for a now dead.com. So if I wanted to suggest that I was part of the digerati, I might show up at a conference or in a presentation dressed in internet noir, channeling Steve Jobs, all black. You've seen the folks, they're known as PIBs, people in black, at technology conferences, at internet conferences. And my final choice for a lot of conferences, and then potentially even for today about what I might wear, is my clown outfit. I would feel awkward in my clown suit. I would feel silly. I would feel awkward. I might feel impotent. And I wouldn't feel comfortable. That would send the wrong message about how I visualize myself. And I think for many technology, the technology issue presents some of these same challenges about visualizing myself in front of a class or in front of a screen. I mean, those of you who've been doing this for some period of time remember the days of CAOs, computers on wheels, when it'd be wheeled in and setting up the projection screen. And hopefully it would work within 3 minutes, but it might take as many as 15 minutes to get it working. And the first time you keyboarded in front of students, hearing the students in the back of the class, or the student who might ambush you in the midst of a presentation where your stuff is on the screen and the smartass in the back of the classroom, that would have been me 40 years ago. In the past, they would have gone after us for our demeanor and our tire. Today, they go after us for content. Who holds up a screen on a notebook or on a tablet and says, Professor Green or Doc Green or Yo Prof, that's an interesting slide you've got there, but the data are 5 years old. Because I'm on the same website, you haven't updated. Or they can communicate directly with scholars. They don't need us as intermediaries on these kinds of issues. And so that changes the whole thing about how we visualize ourselves and how we communicate with students. The underlying issues are, can I see myself doing this? Is it safe for me to do this? Why should I do this? And what's the evident benefit for my students? How am I a better instructor? How are my materials better? How do my students learn better? How am I more effective in this process? I also want to touch about the big promises about big data. We've been hearing about this for a long time in higher ed, and how data will make our lives smarter and simpler. This is my friend Susan Wilson. She's the provost at a place called Acme State University. A little bit about Susan's history. 1986, she was hired as an assistant professor during the enrollment downturn, what was called the Enrollment Crisis of the 1980s. Nationwide across the United States, it was a 24% drop in the population of high school graduates. Colleges across the country, I don't know about Alaska, but in the lower 48, were scrambling and concerned. There was a concern enrollments were going to fall by 25% from 12 million in 1980 by a third to 8 million. Some 700 colleges were going to close. Everybody was scrambling about what do we do and how do we go forward. Turns out, well, adults came in, the matriculation rates went up, but people were trying to figure out data. Now, several years later, as a member of the oversight committee, she heard about something called electronic data interchange to integrate data from the student information system, admissions, and a lot of things that get some analytics to better understand what was going in terms of enrollment flow and retention. 10 years later, she heard about something called enterprise resource planning, as the web emerged, web resources, that was going to just take all the data from different platforms and make it work, and it didn't. And now as the provost, she's hearing about something called the cloud, that we just migrate all our data up to the cloud and it's all come together. We're going to get, it's going to be unicorns and rainbows, and we're going to find out all this stuff about our students with very little effort and a tremendous amount of insight. It's not working that way, folks. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we've got to really sort of plan this stuff out and think about it carefully. If anything, we have more platforms to generate more data than we've ever had in the past between our student information systems, activity platforms for students, the kind of data we can pull from learning management systems, the stuff that we might be able to scrape from their interaction with adaptive platforms and other kinds of stuff. We need to be very thoughtful about this. The best implementations of this are tech-enabled, high touch. Some of you may have heard about what's happened at Georgia State University in recent years. In 5 years, they effectively eliminated the traditional, historic, and big gaps between different student populations. Upper income students versus first-gen students, students of color, Pell Grant students. And the top level explanation for that was they did it through a very complex set of investment in analytics. The reality is, yes, the analytics was only part one. Part two, they hired 170 people to provide support services for those students. So it wasn't just a matter of running all the student data over the weekend and sending Casey Green an email saying, Casey, you're going in a rabbit hole if you continue doing what you're doing. It's the email on Monday says, Casey, you're going to be in a rabbit hole and you're going to have a real problem. And here's where you go to get help to get out of the rabbit hole. It's tech-enabled high touch. Examples of that also we see at Arizona State University in terms of their online program with ASU. ASU may have a great online program, but they've hired hundreds of people to help provide support for those students. I mentioned Georgia State. Another example, this is Austin Community College, which is part of the Digital Fellows program that Karen was part of. They took over a bankrupt mall. At one point, it was the leading mall in Austin, Texas. They took the lower floor, installed 600 computers in what used to be the first floor of a J.C. Penney's, not in classrooms, but in clusters. They're using adaptive learning technology from McGraw-Hill. Faculty are on the floor working directly with students, tech-enabled high touch, as opposed to lecturing against whiteboards. This is where we make a difference. Finally, I want to close with some guidelines for Machiavellian change agents. How do we do this? It's a presentation I've given to the Digital Fellows groups and others. For all of you who sat or slept through introductory political science, you may recall our good friend Niccolo Machiavelli in his book, The Prince. Some folks do it a little bit mercenary, others not. I'm drawing off the work of a colleague of mine, J. Victor Baldridge, some 40 years ago. Baldridge had a paper some years ago talking about guidelines. If you want to be a change agent, how do you go about doing this thoughtfully? And I found those guidelines to be very useful in the work that I do. I want to share those with you as we close. First of those is concentrate your efforts. You can't do everything. Many of us have sat through the sort of whimsical post-it note activity of, these are all the things that we need to do, we should do, we must do. We fill the wall with them. You can only do 3. You got to do triage. Concentrate your efforts in terms of what's manageable, what's possible, what's doable in terms of moving your go-forward strategy. Pick issues carefully and know when to fight. It's not just concentrate, but pick the issues that have possibilities. Know when to fight. The best story I can tell you about knowing when to fight is for those of you who were once a teenager, have a teenager in your home, you know how this plays out. You pick your issues carefully. I think about my own experience with my son, now 36. When he was 13, he wanted to dye his hair green. That could be a big fighting issue for a father and a son in lots of different ways. Ultimately, I said, this is not an issue worth fighting about. So I stood next to him in the shower and poured the dye over his hair twice. It didn't take the first time. And fortunately, it didn't take the second time. But I got a lot of credit points that lasted for about a week and a half. Peace in the household by knowing which issues to fight. And the same thing occurs on campus. You all know that. Know the history. We talk about the importance of hitting the ground running, and that's wrong. You need to know the backstory. You should hit the ground walking around and talking with a lot of people and learning the history when you have any conversation about a change initiative. Because invariably, if you spend a lot of time, come forward with a thoughtful plan, throw it on a screen and ship it out on email, there's going to be somebody who says, yeah, we did that. You just didn't do your due diligence to understand we tried that a couple of years ago and it failed miserably. So it's really important to walk around, talk with a lot of folks, and know the history of a particular topic before you launch a new strategy. You need to build coalitions and make friends, have coffee, have pizza, whatever the local currency for building coalitions might be in Alaska as well. Again, I'm from the lower 48. Find that 5 or 10% of common interest, because it is true that coalitions are far more effective than individual voices in terms of going forward. Set modest and realistic goals for what you say you can accomplish. If you say you're going to do a 70% gain and you only do 63%, have you failed miserably? Or have you just not succeeded enough? Let me put this in a somewhat similar context in terms of realistic goals. I live in Los Angeles. I moved here 40 years ago for graduate school. When I first moved here, the flight time gate to gate from Los Angeles to San Francisco was 48 minutes. Today, it's 1 hour and 47 minutes. And that's not because San Francisco and Los Angeles have moved farther apart because of continental drift. It means that the airlines are managing expectations, and change agents should manage expectations as well in terms of what is it that realistically you can accomplish. I'm not suggesting you cook your data. I'm saying be pragmatic, be realistic about setting expectations for what you can and may not be able to do. Leverage the value of data. Think carefully about data. Think about data when you begin, not after the fact. Bake in your conversations about data. If we want to know the answers to these questions, ask those questions at the beginning, because if you don't do that, you won't have the data you need at the end to answer those questions about impact and outcome. Anticipate personnel turnover. People leave, people change when you have a 2, 3, 4-year project. The Digital Fellows Project began with 32 provosts in July 2017. When the project ended in March 2019, only 21 of those 32 provosts had the same job. A couple of them became college presidents. Some of them lost the favor, as the Chinese used to say, the mandate from heaven. In a couple of cases, it was the mandate from their president, and lost their positions as provost and went back into faculty ranks. One retired, a couple stayed in a provost title but moved to other positions. If you have any kind of group activity, anticipate the likelihood of personnel turnover, even over 2 or 3 years. Set deadlines for decisions, because deadlines help concentrate what we do and require us to think backwards. If we're going to do this by a particular date, what are the milestones we have to work backwards for to make sure that we can do that? And remember, nothing is static. Anticipate change in the process, because stuff happens. So with that, let's go to some questions. Karen, may I ask you to moderate the questions, please?
Absolutely. So, questions? Yeah, Tracy.
Early on,
I'm sorry, if I may, you folks may know one another, I don't. So it would help me a little bit if you would introduce yourself, particularly because there's also folks at remote locations, who you are, what you do, and very quickly, what part of the empire is yours, okay?
Hey, Casey, this is Cody. Can I ask that you swing over to so that we see you rather than your questions slide?
Okay, I will do that. Or I will try to do that. See if I can. You should be.
And there should be a stop sharing somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm looking for that. I'm screen sharing. All right, this should be me now. It should be coming up. There we go. Hi, everybody. Now we're live. I'm the big head on the screen.
Earlier you had mentioned the value of.
You were supposed to tell him who you are.
Eric, you know who I am.
Can he put his face on so I'm not talking to myself?
Totally. Part of it is
Thank
that
you.
what the people outside of the room is what we see on the screen. So I'm trying to put you on the screen when you're asking the question, then I'll swing back to Casey.
Okay.
So apologies for that.
All right, Casey. I'm Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
IT services at the support help desk.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. So I was wondering about how we can engage responses from surveys. If we started to do more surveys to get feedback, how can we get a better response from surveys?
So how do you push up response rates so that there's some validity and value to the data and people only say you got a 6% response rate? Is that a kind of a fair, I'm not denigrating your question. I'm trying to rephrase it to be sure I understand what you're asking.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So I've been doing survey research for too long, not just on IT issues, but I began my career. Some of you may be familiar with the Higher Education Research Institute, which does the annual survey of college freshmen, hundreds of thousands of them each and every year. Survey, the survey is important to you because you want to know that information. If I'm the survey participant, the survey is not important to me unless I see that there's some value I'm going to get out of it. So part of that is drafting questions where the respondent sees that he or she is going to get some value out of the information you're going to collect, and you promise to share that information back. First and foremost, you need to make a compelling presentation to me as a potential respondent about why this survey should be important to you. If I'm the potential respondent, I know it's important to you. Tell me why it should be important to me and how this is going to help me. Okay?
Great, thank you.
We intend to use these data to provide better resources, tailor services, argue for more money, get you more resources, do something. But we can't do that without your information and your participation.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
So my name is Elise Tomlinson. I'm the library dean, and I was just wondering how you define courseware when you were showing how few courses actually use courseware, if you're referring to like Blackboard course management system type things, or more the McGraw-Hill prepackaged content type courseware.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking for that. If we had a little more time, I would have had a couple of extra slides about the courseware digital learning definitions. A learning management system is not courseware. It's a platform. You post stuff on it. You look at the history of how these things emerged beginning in 1998. it was a way for faculty to put stuff on the web who didn't want to learn HTML code. And we keep adding stuff, like ornaments on a Christmas tree to our learning management systems. The other thing I've said about a learning management system is it's like a great supermarket scanner. It's aggregating all this data that sometimes we use effectively, not. It's in terms of unobtrusive measures about what students do. But that's not courseware. Courseware could be an adaptive learning application from McGraw-Hill or Smart Sparrow or Cengage or others. That's either a very narrow simulation or application about a particular concept, or could be a full course. But the LMS is not that. And let me go over answer in one sense. One of the problems with the learning management systems, I've argued on my blog, is I have a sense of semantic remorse. When these things first emerged in the late 90s, they were called course management systems and then learning management systems. And the problem is that they were essentially management tools for faculty. How do I manage putting my stuff on the web? How do I manage giving students exams? How do I manage getting some supplemental material there? And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. We're up to about 70% of courses in one way or another are using them. 80% of the activities and about 20% of the features and functionality of these platforms. They vary again, Blackboard, Canvas, D2L, Moodle, other kinds of stuff. The problem is what we really want is not a learning management platform. What we want is a student engagement platform, something that will make the experience sticky for students. And we haven't gotten there yet. And that's where I think the challenge is. That's where the semantic remorse is. We want a student engagement platform, an SEP, as opposed to a learning management platform, which is really faculty-centric, as opposed to a student engagement platform, which would be student-centric.
Thank you.
Other questions? Richard.
Hi, Casey. My name is Richard. I'm an instructor in literature and geography here at UAS. I was really interested in that example you gave about the shopping mall and the outreach that went involved with addressing the gap in the community. I wondered if you could just share some of the more recent successful or sort of advanced sort of programs that you've seen in your network or in your experiences that you could share with us that have been successful for instructional purposes.
Sure. Let me make a qualifying statement. Success is relative. Success is contextual. Karen, I hope you'll bear me out that at least for example, within the context of the Digital Fellows Project, all the campuses had to do an individual project and they were all over the map. There was some commonality in that many of them were in STEM areas. Some decided to use adaptive platforms. We didn't stipulate which one you had to use. Some went with McGraw, some went with Smart Sparrow, some went with Cog Books. Some were successful, some were somewhat successful. Couple of examples about that. At one campus, which did a math application with adaptive learning, at one of the regional conferences we had in February, opening the conference for about 100 people, the chancellor of the campus said, well, we did a pilot with an adaptive learning platform for mathematics. One of the great things was we reduced the DFIW rate by 40% in the courses that used the adaptive platform as opposed to the way we talk in the past. And yet in a later conversation discussion led by the provost about that experience, the provost went on to say, yeah, well, that's true, but we saw no difference in terms of the learning outcomes on the midterms and the finals. So yes, good news that the DFWI rate went down. Disappointing that it had no impact on academic outcomes. Another campus used a platform and found a statistically significant difference between the intervention segment sections and the ones that were taught traditionally or conventionally. On the other hand, the actual numeric difference in academic performance in those sections was minuscule. So you have this interesting anomaly that you don't learn in introductory statistics, where sometimes things can be significant without being statistically significant. In other instances, they can be statistically significant without being numerically significant. So again, I want to emphasize, we are very early days in these platforms. It is a movement of cup to lip in terms of how they're implemented by different campuses and different departments, different programs with different content. This is not a uniform intervention. You have to think carefully. You have to do due diligence on these things. The real question is, if you're interested in these things, Find folks like you who have the similar population of students, similar faculty, similar resources. You may be able to find some of those folks, for example, by checking with Merlot, which is a clearinghouse that has faculty reviews on a rich array of instructional resources, textbooks, adaptive learning, other kinds of OER resources. Put a query out in the web in terms through different disciplinary listservs and others. We are still very early in this process in terms of looking at these platforms, and we have a desperate need for careful assessment, thoughtful assessment, and sharing that assessment so we understand what's happening and which of the tools work and under what circumstances. Probably not the answer you wanted, but that's the best one I can give.
That's good, thank you.
Karen, I'm sorry, would you like to add on that in terms of what you heard from your colleagues from the Digital Fellows Project?
Well, I think most of them know the kinds of things we did in terms of the fisheries and the iPad program, sending those iPads out around the state.
Yes.
Actually a very successful program, and that program has grown. I've been talking to some faculty about expanding that to some of our other programs because we do so much online and we go into the rural communities that a lot of the people in the rural communities do not have access to the kinds of technologies they need to have to interact synchronously. So thinking about how we can use those. Ali Ziegler did some stuff with OERs. Kitty LaBounty did biology with adaptive tools. And then Robin did some stuff with interactive screen for her construction technology.
Yeah.
And Richard's going to be one of our digital fellows for next year. And Richard, why don't you just talk a little bit about what your plan is?
I'm working on expansion into a field of neogeography where we're using cartographic technology to map cultural practices within Southeast Alaska. But I want to use it as a collaborative tool in an introductory geography course to allow students to sort of personalize definitions of place and space and some of the key terms in the field through this kind of cultural cartography digital technology.
I mean, that to me is the kind of experience that makes it sticky and personalized for students.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you catch them.
Yeah. Karen, I'm just part of also what I was asking about in terms of what you heard from some of your other CAO colleagues in terms of their experience at their individual campuses that I may not have touched on in my response about what we're seeing and what works.
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to do was really have our math faculty be involved and really look at some of our developmental courses and what we could do and use some technologies to help in those classes. And some of the other people, we didn't do that here, but some of the other people in the Digital Fellows programs did do that. And a number of them had good success with Alex.
Yes.
So I'm still working on getting our math faculty on board with Alex because I think that if we could have that kind of success that some of my colleagues in the program had, it would be really, really good for us in terms of our students. So I think the Alex thing is one of the biggest takeaways for me.
Yeah, Austin Community College was using Alex even before they involved in the Digital Fellows Program. For those of you who are interested in adaptive learning at large, not necessarily a particular application, APLU, the Personalized Learning Consortium at APLU, the Association of Public Land-Grant Universities, last fall issued kind of a primer getting started with adaptive learning technologies. If you just Google on that, or Karen, you may have access, you may have that reference from some other materials I provided. That's a good place to start in terms of just sort of a learning about and how do we begin to map the go-forward strategy on some of this. And it's platform independent.
Yep. Great. Other questions? Michael, you must have a question.
I can
All right,
raise
Michael, let's have a question.
I'll save you for one. I have a couple questions online. I'll give one and then I'll give Michael the table. One question from Paul Bonna, who is the assistant professor of biology on the Sitka campus, if I remember correctly. He teaches microbiology, anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology. He asks, how can we improve students' engagement in asynchronously conducted online classes where attendance is not required?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a good answer for that. I think part of this, again, is sort of queuing it up for students in terms of part of the presentation, why this material is compelling or should be compelling. The asynchronous stuff, and where attendance isn't required, and particularly in adaptive environments, this is actually something that may relate more to the last question than the current, is also the issue of competency versus seat time. And I'm not sure if that gets at the question that's being asked as well. We had one of the campuses found with a math application found that some of their students were blowing through a semester's worth of content in 14 days because the stuff was online. It was highly structured. They could do it. They could master it. And yet the accrediting requirements were all based on seat time as opposed to competency. So these become some of the interesting challenges as the environment changes and the instructional resources and curricular tools change. But that may not be the answer to the question that's being asked. And if that's the case, my apologies.
We'll see his response online if he does have any follow-on questions. So,
okay.
Michael, I guess I turn it over to you.
So, hello, Casey, and I think the reason they're putting me on the spot is I'm Michael Siri. I'm the CIO here and Vice Chancellor for Administration.
Hi, Michael.
So I hope you can hear me.
I can.
So first of all, I just really want to thank you for being able to be here. I've gotten to have the privilege of hearing you talk many times and meet you at EDUCAUSE and other conferences, as well as participate in the survey. So thrilled to have you being a part of our.
Michael, I want to thank you in front of your colleagues. I am dependent upon the kindness of strangers, metaphorically, in terms of folks completing the survey. It's the issue of what's compelling for the survey participant to complete the questionnaire. And I want to thank you for completing the survey year in and year out. That's much appreciated.
So, and I guess, as wearing my different hats, my interests are a little bit different than I think where the faculty come from by their nature. So I hope I don't bore them with my question, but something that occupies my thinking these days is just the change in the industry from services that we might select carefully and vet carefully and install and integrate into our campus environments and then take responsibility for. And increasingly now we're in a world where, whether it's Blackboard or just a random website, faculty are being innovative in incorporating things, but increasingly these are not products which we necessarily vet, or they're products in which liability is being transferred from the institution onto the actual student themselves. And I guess my concern is have there been conversations about this and how to manage this transferal of I guess I want to say liability from institutions that would select tools and take on an obligation to ensure copyright to now I'm thinking of a tool by one of our basically by Blackboard Ally, which says by using this student, you will be held liable for any copyright protected content that you will access. So to me, this is a real shift of framework where I guess I worry that our students are more at risk now. And in your conversations with other professionals or other universities, has this come up and do you have any ideas about how this is being dealt with?
Yes, so I want to thank you for the question. You've touched both directly and indirectly on a number of issues, some of which are newer, some of which go back for a long period of time. The copyright issue has been a big issue in higher education. We largely thought because we're academics, we could skate and our students could skate on that. We weren't affected. We weren't responsible. We certainly found this out in the peer-to-peer wars. Once we had broadband on campuses and students were downloading music, video, and other stuff. And so much of the campus traffic at night was not about academic work, but it was about entertainment. And now it also goes into multiplayer games. That's one part of it. Same thing in terms of course packs with faculty who would have stuff aggregated, take it to a copy shop. And again, these other parts, there's a third dimension to that, which I don't think you raised directly, but is implicit in that. And that's the whole issue of data and privacy. Whether it's Blackboard or Facebook or anybody else, scraping data, having access to student data, or for the campuses, and there are some now that are beginning to install an Alexa unit in a student dorm, and Alexa's listening in. As we learned this week that in fact at Amazon, there's a whole army of Amazon folks who are selectively listening to conversations. In theory, they're not paying attention to what I'm saying. as I'm mumbling to myself while I'm working in my office, but might be, and try to hone the AI algorithms in terms of making Alexa more responsive. I know a couple of one campus has installed Alexa in dorm rooms as a way as an alternative to the campus portal. Alexa, what's for lunch today in Acme Hall kinds of stuff, or Alexa, where can I find this on campus? So there's a lot of different parts of that. That also plays out with faculty and research in terms of faculty who are buying cycles from Amazon or Google using P cards for high performance computing and not reading the fine print. And at the end of the day, if something goes awry in terms of a breach on data, Google and Amazon and Microsoft will say we're not responsible. It's Casey Green at Acme College who has the problem, or Acme College has the problem. I think the best we can do for this, Michael, is up our game on user education in lots of different ways, from the initial point of contact for faculty members and for students in terms of a series of on-screen tutorials, to constant vigilance along the way. We will never be 100% effective. I think we're getting a little better on some of this stuff when we start thinking about some of the campus efforts at many places on viruses. But we've got a long way to go, and we are forever vulnerable on the issues that you raised and the ones that I alluded to that supplement and complement the ones that you raised about this vulnerability and risk. But to me, the front end is user education. We can't do after the fact stuff's not going to work. We just have to raise the lowest common denominator of understanding on the part of our users, students, faculty, and staff, whether that's don't open an unknown email because it's a spear phishing attack that gets into the system, issues about privacy, tutorials about privacy, tutorials about user training would be another part of this for me. And the other efforts that we make in terms of protecting the integrity of our systems and protecting the privacy of our users.
Thank you. Cody, are there any more questions online?
Yeah, another question from James Yap, who is our grants administrator in the Henderson building, I believe. He asked, one of the challenges in digital learning you mentioned is students' inaccessibility to gadgets and budget. With the recent pending budget cuts in Alaska, how do we overcome this challenge?
Well, yeah, so I have one strategy for you. Make devices required. In other words, students at Alaska Southeast or Fairbanks, just as they are at any other campuses, there's a CSS number that says the cost of attendance, and that's tuition, books, personal expenses, room and board if you live on campus, or something if you live off campus. But notice what's missing in that. If you look at the College Board numbers, the CSS, College Scholarship Services nationwide, or if you cherry pick individual campuses in Alaska or elsewhere, unless the campus requires a computer, there's nothing to say that provides aid for a student to get a computer or a digital device. If by waving the digital wand or the policy wand, your stuff on your websites that say, we encourage students to have a computer. This is what we recommend. No, you don't want a CPM machine, the one that's been sitting in the attic, or under the house for the last couple of years with an analog monitor and IBM, with a hard drive and other stuff, is not going to work. You needed some internet connection. But if you stipulate that, in fact, all the students at Southeast have to have a computer or a tablet, then the cost of that tablet goes into the CSS calculation, which means some part of that may be Pell Grant eligible. Some part of that may be financial aid eligible. And some part of that is still going to have to come out of pocket from the student, but that would be less than the student currently, the student and or his or her family pays today.
Great. How about one more question?
Two, if you'd like. It's your time. My calendar's a little flexible, but go ahead.
I'll ask a question. Casey, I don't believe I introduced myself with much detail. My name is Cody Bennett. I'm User Services Manager, which means that I'm responsible for help desk, media services, classroom support, and I have the sort of unofficial title of being the one extrovert in a sea of introverts at the IT department. And as
Cody, for your 360 review.
So in that role, I'm constantly hoping to build roads with faculty and with staff across campus to be able to help bring some of these needs of digital learning opportunities together. But there's a lot of siloing that necessarily happens because we're all so very busy with our own loads. Have you seen institutions that have really made great strides in changing from something where there may be some separation in areas and basically having unification so that everybody's on the same page, moving in the same direction?
Yeah, you know, a lot of that is campus is unique to individual, you know, feels like it's unique to individual campuses and campus cultures. Often it is, you know, do the folks that teach math have any common interest with the folks who teach biology? The campus TLT center is someplace else. You have to go to it as opposed to them making house calls, kinds of stuff. The best I can say is outreach. I think that the other part also is shameless self-promotion. I know a lot of campuses do this. It strikes me that the role of folks like you, Cody, who do instructional support, you and your colleagues, very similar to the role of reference librarians, resource librarians, you know, and often to the point of they are specialists in instructional technology applications in a particular area. And yet we don't recognize the role of instructional technology support personnel like we recognize the role of reference librarians. There's a lot of parallels. And for me, I think the one part of this is shameless self-promotion, go knocking on doors, promoting resources, doing webinars. Again, you know, faculty will have a just-in-time mentality. I'll go to it when I need it. I don't need it right now. But the other part also is the faculty, you know, get the faculty who you have worked with to essentially be your advocates, to talk you up, to say, we had a great experience working with Cody and his colleagues or your colleagues elsewhere doing this. And I know they're available. I know they're interested. I know they're willing. You ought to give them a call. You know, and the number to call is, or the email address is, along those lines. And you know what? I realize this is sort of old school in one sense. Do a little bit of show and tell if you haven't done it, or escalate the game and show and tell. Maybe not all day or all afternoon, but you know, and maybe but lunchtime show and tells, not at the center of campus, in the building for the departments that you want to serve, with the faculty who are members of those departments. Ultimately, the most influential, the biggest influences are peer-to-peer. Somebody like me who's doing this, and I see that I can do this. So if you localize it, you customize it, and it's the peer-to-peer voice that's advocating, that may be a strategy that if you haven't tried it, that may offer some opportunities.
Thank you.
And Cody, if I may, just to give you a little recognition, you should all give Cody a round of applause. We spent 15 minutes trying to get this damn thing to work yesterday. In theory, it should be idiot-proof. In fact, it took us a little bit of time to be sure that one of us, more me than Cody, was clicking on the right button so we could get these screens to work to do this webinar. And Cody, I am much appreciative of your patience and your technical expertise to make this work.
Glad to help.
Thank you, Cody.
Now it's lunch.
All right, any other
Might have
questions?
had a beer. It's Friday someplace.
Well, thank you very, very much, Casey, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
No, happy to do so. Karen, thank you for the opportunity to at least meet over screens and talk with some of your colleagues.
Well, you're always a wealth of information, and every time I listen to you, I learn more. So again, thank you, and I hope to stay in touch.
Happy weekend, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.